Well, good afternoon. I'm Scott Luckett. I'm the Vice President for Industry Strategy at GCommerce. At GCommerce, we're happy to continue hosting a series of webinars that inform and advance the commerce objectives of all the companies in the industry channels we serve. We want to welcome you and thank you for joining our webinar this afternoon. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website at gcommerceinc.com/webinar in following the broadcast. You can, as we can during the broadcast. If we don't get your question answered during the broadcast, we'll circle back and address all questions. There will be a short survey following the broadcast, and your feedback and input will be very helpful to us. It'll also give you one more opportunity to ask questions. Right now, I'll close by saying all attendees are muted. Today's webinar is presented by Visual SKUs. They are a leading provider of digital asset management software and imaging services, including 360 and 3D, the focus of our topic today. Our speakers will be Pat Wheelmeyer. He's the Vice President for Marketing and Operations at Visual SKUs, where he's been a part of the leadership team for 10 years. He's joined by Ian McNabb, Chief Technology Officer at Visual SKUs, where he's been since 2010. Previously, Ian was Director of Technical Services at PriceDeck Software. Both Pat and Ian have been active participants and contributors to the technical standards and best practices of the Auto Care Association. Following their presentation, we'll hear from a panel representing the major resellers in the aftermarket. Ken Ingram has been with Napa Genuine Parts for over 20 years, and since 2016 has been Senior Director, Digital Content Services. Doug Wiggin is the rising chairman of the Auto Care Association Technology Standards Committee and is the Director of Software Architecture at the Aftermarket Auto Parts Alliance, where he's been since 2010. Bill Lipsey is the Director of Content at Autozone, where he has served since 2003. Bill, along with Ken and Doug, have all served on the Technology Standards Committee and have played an important role in defining the industry standards and best practices of the aftermarket industry. Gentlemen, we look forward to hearing your thoughts about product images and digital assets. But first, let's hear from Pat and Ian.
Thank you, Scott, for that nice introduction for both Ian and myself. And I, excuse me, want to welcome everyone to the webinar today. In the next 25 minutes or so, Ian and I will take you through a bit of a journey of the landscape of product images and digital assets in the aftermarket today. What we're hoping to leave you with is 7 key takeaways. Now, these are takeaways that we are seeing trends in the industry, things that we've seen that have happened in the past that are now changing and moving forward, and these should be really valuable for your business. So specifically, what we're going to go through is the demand for digital assets and how that demand is increasing significantly. And it's increasing from both ends of the supply chain, so from the suppliers and from the resellers, but more importantly, from the consumer. We want to talk to you a bit about mobile e-commerce and how that is, the growth of it is staggering, really. And we'll show you some statistics there and talk about the impact of that on the aftermarket overall regarding selling product. We'll discuss the journey of producing digital assets and product images and the fact that it is an evolution. It's something that continues. It's not an event. And in the past, I think many companies have looked at it as an event. With all the changes that are happening in the aftermarket, it's really a process. We'll talk a bit about the industry requirements in overall and how those are changing. We're going to touch on 360 and 3D, which we see as one of the biggest trends in the aftermarket, certainly over the last handful of years and absolutely moving forward. We want to touch on the business case of digital assets and how that business case that was established in 2005 is still intact and in fact much stronger. And then the last item we want to talk about is digital asset management tools. The whole, as asset libraries are increasing and as the breadth of the assets that are in these libraries are changing, there is a need for tools to help manage the process of sharing and distributing. So we'll go through that as well. First off, I want to talk about the demand for digital assets. And I mentioned that demand is coming from all different directions in the aftermarket. You've got suppliers that are creating more digital assets to satisfy demand that they're seeing. There's resellers that are asking for more assets because they're the ones that are in touch with what the consumer's doing. And then the big point is what the consumer's doing and what their behavior is changing and what they are actually asking for. Let's go back 15 years. In 2005, AAIA put together a work group to define best practices for product images. It was only product images at that time, no other digital assets. Now, the goal really was to move from the dreaded no image to images. There wasn't all that many images in the aftermarket at that time. There was certainly a need for it. E-commerce was coming on pretty strong, and the whole push was to move suppliers in the direction of seeing the benefits and the values of digital assets, specifically product images, and try to get to at least one image per product. Now, if you flash forward to today, so 15 years later, the changes in the aftermarket and the how digital assets and product images have been embraced is tremendous. And you can see these listings that I have on the screen here. You can find them anywhere and everywhere. So you're seeing multiple images per product. You're seeing 360 images. You're seeing higher quality images. Now, this is a far cry from the one image that we would have seen 15 years ago. So obviously, it's been embraced and we're moving in the right direction. If you look at the performance industry, now, here's a beautiful listing. Excellent quality images, multiple views of the image, videos that show the product rotating in the video, so you can see it from all angles, and then seeing it on the vehicle. So lifestyle images and real products in action is certainly a direction that things are going. Here's a very interesting stat for you. So eBay looked at almost 7 million listings, which is a tremendous amount of listings. And what they concluded is that if you go from a single image to 3 images, you have a 10% lift in conversions. So you're going to sell 10% more by going from 1 image to 3 images. And additionally, if you add more images to 4, 5, and 6, each additional image over 3, you get a 3% lift. Pretty clearly showing the correlation and the power of expanding the number of images that you show in your listings, wherever it may be, is going to lead to higher sales. So this covers takeaway number 1, which is the demand really for digital assets is growing significantly.
E-commerce on mobile devices is absolutely exploding. It seems like everyone has a cell phone in their hands. And it appears that they're being used for e-commerce. If it wasn't from a trusted source, I'm not sure I would believe these statistics. But eMarketers reports that 70% of e-commerce will be performed on a smartphone this year, 73% next year. With $3.5 trillion being done in e-commerce, that's a lot of purchases being done through a cell phone or mobile device. Well, with all the shopping taking place on mobile devices, it's really interesting to find out that only 12% of consumers find shopping on mobile convenient. And 57% of consumers say they need more product data, and this would include digital assets, such as images, both still in 360, 3D, as well as other assets like video, both about the product and reviews of the product. It's not just B2C, it's also B2B. So takeaway number 2 is about both the retailers and suppliers having to take mobile seriously. That may even include creating mobile-specific images, as is done in other industries. These mobile-specific images call out important product info in a single image.
So we've seen that the demand for digital assets is exploding, as is mobile e-commerce. So let's talk about takeaway number 3, which is the process of actually producing, managing, and distributing digital assets. It was viewed years ago as, okay, if we can get the 1 image or 1.5 images or whatever it is on average per products that we manufacture, then we're okay, we're done. Well, I think what we're going to show you throughout this presentation is that it's not done. This is not a process that ends, that is over. In fact, it's evolving so much that it is something that aftermarket businesses need to focus on a continual basis of always producing and, of course, distributing digital assets. Let's look at a timeline. And I think this timeline illustrates pretty well how things are changing over time. We've talked about 2005 when we first developed the industry, the best practices guidelines only for product images. Between then and when we issued the second release of the best practices guideline, you saw aftermarket companies developing more and more product images, specifically product images. There wasn't too many other digital assets that people were focusing on. And we were starting to get to the point where the coverage was okay, and certainly on bestsellers and things like that. In 2012, we introduced guidelines for PDF and for video to expand the breadth of digital assets that are being distributed through the various marketplaces. Now we move to 2016, and this is when with AutoCare, we added 360 and 3D to the best practices. We did that because we were starting to see businesses adopt this type of digital asset. And over that, from 2016 to today, now we've seen 360 and 3D become mainstream. Most companies are considering it, are thinking about it. The resellers are talking about it a lot with their suppliers. It is becoming mainstream, just like it is in many other industries. So it's not just the aftermarket. You see 360 and 3D images for good reason in all kinds of other industries. In 2020, AutoCare will be publishing another revision of the best practices guide, and it will include more information on 360 and 3D. So you can see that things are changing, and they've been changing every year since we first started banging the drum on product images. But here's what we see as some of the key things to keep in mind, key trends going forward. We're going to start seeing more images per product. I showed you that stat of eBay. I've showed you some of those listings. We certainly see that the trend is moving towards more image views per product. And I think that is just going to accelerate and continue. I mentioned earlier the quality of images. Definitely we are seeing a movement and a push towards higher quality images, some of them significantly higher quality. And a lot of this push is coming, again, it comes from the consumer, but we're seeing it from resellers. And like I say, the quality is moving up for sure. Obviously, with the growth of 360 and 3D, people will be producing a lot more of those, suppliers will, therefore their image libraries will be growing with 360 and 3D images. And of course, there's a lot of digital assets that go along with 360 and 3D because of the number of frames. So you're going to see suppliers' libraries growing. Ian mentioned this, and we see this in many other industries, is mobile specific images. That is not something that is we're producing today. It's not something that there is pressure today on that. But when you look at the statistics of mobile, and so much e-commerce is going over mobile, it is not a stretch to think that mobile specific images will not be creeping into the aftermarket. And we certainly believe that they will. There'll be a growth in lifestyle images, certainly in the performance sector, and I would argue that in the hard parts as well, and more product and package images. So images, that one image with your product beside your package. These are things that we see moving forward that are trends that we think aftermarket businesses should pay attention to. Now, what should aftermarket businesses do with the changing landscape that we've described so far? Here's where we would recommend that aftermarket businesses start, and that is from a strategic perspective. And what is your digital asset strategy going forward? Not this quarter or next quarter, but what is the longer term strategy, and how do you see that impacting your business as far as sales and as far as competition? So develop a longer term strategy. What goes along with a longer term strategy is also budgets that are longer term. And I know this is a huge challenge for every business in the aftermarket. In fact, every business anywhere, is to get longer term budgets. Very difficult, but it is necessary to at least be planning for the production and the distribution of digital assets over the long term, because it's critical to your business and it's critical to generating more sales and to satisfy the needs of the consumer, which of course is going to lead to more sales. We've talked about image quality. We would recommend focusing on improving and bringing up the image quality. When it comes to adding a lot of digital assets to your library, we're certainly recommending tools, and tools like digital asset management software, and there are other tools out there. Now, what these tools allow you to do, a couple of very critical things. The first being, they allow you to get your assets to market faster. The sooner you get your assets into your marketplaces, the sooner you can start generating sales from those, and the sooner you can start reducing returns from those purchases. So time to market matters, and software certainly helps as your libraries grow, as the assets change. It helps tremendously to get those assets to market using software tools. And lastly, it's the analytics. It's being able to analyze what you have, what you don't have, what is missing, what have you sent, when have you sent it, who have you sent it to? So all of the analytics that goes along with this, to do it manually is, well, it's exactly that. It's manually and it's extremely time consuming. So you would look for tools for that. So this is a process that we would recommend aftermarket companies start to consider to react to the changing landscape of digital assets.
As Pat just covered in takeaway 3, the process of producing digital assets is an ongoing one. And one of the reasons for that is technology is continually changing. And the industry will continue to change with it in order to keep its standards up to date. AutoCare has been meeting over the course of 2019 and continues to meet early this year, 2020, to make sure that the digital asset best practices depict what is actually required for a supplier to produce in their digital assets, and that what they do produce will fill the requirements of their trading partners. I would expect that these updated best practices to be published early this year. One of the things that these updated best practices are going to address is a minimum image size. The retailers out there want the largest, best quality images that a supplier can provide. But because the previous version of the best practices called for a minimum size of 1500 by 1500, this was mistaken by many in the industry as the standard. The new best practices will increase this, but the takeaway here is that the supplier or manufacturer should produce the highest quality assets they can and provide those to their trading partners. Those manufacturers that kept the 1500 by 1500 as their master may have to end up reshooting entire product lines. One of the other things the industry best practices will reaffirm is the best practice for 360 and 3D images. First introduced in the best practices in 2016, I can tell you that they're not a fad and that they are indeed here to stay. Some interesting statistics about 360 and 3D product images. 60% of consumers prefer to view a product from multiple angles, and a 360 image sure provides that. 54% say that a 360 3D would influence their decision on a purchase. Conversion rates increase by 40% when a product has a 360 or 3D image. That in itself is the reason to produce 360 or 3D images. And something near and dear to the automotive industry, 20% of returns are because the product doesn't look like it did online. And a 360 image would definitely solve that. One of the most significant changes we are seeing in the automotive aftermarket today is that the retailers are requesting 360 3D product images from their suppliers. And if it's not already clear to the suppliers that are on this call and why they're being requested, it's fundamentally because they drive more sales, they reduce returns, and they have a positive ROI on customer loyalty. I would also add that they enhance and simplify the mobile experience. So you're a manufacturer supplier and you're being asked for 360 3D product images from your trading partners. What should you do? We recommend a 6-step approach. The first would be to review your product lines. Some products are well suited for 360 and 3D, and some are not. At the same time, discuss this with your trading partners. Find out what their requirements are. The retailers are publishing what they want and how they want them. Then you need to decide if this is something you want to take on yourself or whether it's something you want to outsource. 360 3D photography requires specialized equipment. You need turntables, etc. And you require the personnel to operate this equipment. If you decide to outsource it, then it requires either shipping the product or bringing an outsourced service provider into your facility to perform on-site photography. Managing still images was pretty straightforward, but with 360 and 3D images, you can have anywhere from 24 to hundreds of images per product for each individual frame. Consider a software solution, a DAM system that allows you to manage and distribute your digital assets. And then, as we've already discussed, digital asset production is an ongoing and recurring activity. So you have to plan and budget for their production.
I mentioned earlier the the benefits of digital assets and product images and the business case. And in 2005, it was pretty clear. We need to move from no images to images because images will help us increase sales. It will help to lower returns because the purchaser knows what they're buying, they can see it. And of course, returns have always been a big challenge for in the aftermarket. And then to reinforce your competitive advantage. If your competitor doesn't have images and you do, well, who's going to get the sale? So back in 2005, that was the business case. More sales, lower returns, competitive advantage. I would argue that today, 15 years later, that argument is more than intact. And in fact, when you add in some of the changes that we're seeing in the aftermarket with respect to digital assets and product images, the business case is even stronger, mainly because you need to now factor in the consumer. And we didn't really do that 15 years ago. We're doing that now because we have a lot more data on what, and all industries do, on what it is that the consumer wants. How do they behave? How do they behave on mobile? How do they behave on desktops? How do they like to buy? How do they not like to buy? What experience do they like? So specifically, when you look at consumer behavior, some of the things that we've outlined in this presentation, just think about mobile. The fact that so much is happening on a smartphone, that is a massive, massive behavior change. And that behavior change leads and promotes the business case even stronger for digital assets. And we've talked about customer loyalty. Ian showed a few stats there. And that really matters when you give the consumer a really good buying experience, whether that be on a desktop or a smartphone or any other device. The better experience they get, the more likely they are to come back and repurchase. So now when you look at the business case of product images, it's not just about, oh, we sell more and we lower our returns. It is, if you satisfy the customer's changing behavior and you give them the experience they want, then the business case back in 2005 really explodes. So I would argue that the business case is well intact and in fact much, much stronger than it was years ago. Lastly, I want to talk about digital asset management. And we think that aftermarket companies need to start, and many are considering the tools that they need to put in place so that they can manage their digital assets more effectively. We've talked about the fact that the breadth of digital assets is changing with 3D and 360. There's new digital asset types coming into the market. Therefore, what that's doing is it's increasing the quantity of digital assets that suppliers need to manage. And what this means in a nutshell is it's just much more complex. You've got more assets, you've got different types of assets, and they need to be managed and they need to be formatted and sent to marketplaces. And the sooner you get them out to the marketplaces in the formats that the marketplaces are requesting, the sooner you're going to experience the increased sales and the reduced returns, etc. And today, if you're not using tools, it's manual. It's time consuming, which means it's very resource intensive, which of course means it's expensive. When you look at the investment that you make in your product images and digital assets, and what we're talking about in this presentation really throughout is that this is expanding, this is growing. You will be producing more digital assets, not less, and actually considerably more. So the investment is growing and it will continue to grow. In order to get to manage that properly, software helps you, and the ROI on that software is very strong when you consider the investment that you're putting into the digital assets. So we certainly see that there will be a movement for all types of different companies towards using tools to manage their asset libraries more effectively. So that's the 7 takeaways we hope that we have provided you in this webinar. The demand for digital assets is increasing considerably, and we all need to be prepared for that. Mobile is, so much is happening on mobile, so we need to adjust for that. We need to consider the fact that image production and distribution and management is an ongoing activity. It doesn't change. The industry requirements are changing, and I'm sure we'll have some discussions with the panelists about that. The 360 3D is mainstream. It's not niche anymore. It is mainstream, and we all need to get on board on that. The business case for digital assets is stronger than it ever has been. And with libraries that are growing and changing and evolving, companies need to look to tools to be able to manage these and distribute them more effectively. So I hope that we've provided some value to you all there. And I think on that note, Scott, I'll pass it back to you, and we can listen to the panelists and see what their opinions are.
Well, thank you, Pat and Ian. That was some great information, beautifully presented and illustrated. Thank you so much for that. We, as I said, are very pleased to have Ken and Doug and Bill with us, representing thousands and thousands of stores and locations across the country, and all channels of distribution. We're anxious to hear your thoughts about what Ian and Pat have presented to us. And let me start with a question about mobile devices here, because I think it was Ian who presented a rather remarkable slide depicting the explosive growth and share of e-commerce done on mobile devices like phones and tablets. Can I ask you to comment on the shopping behaviors you see with your commercial and retail customers on mobile devices? Do you have any stories of how those devices are used and what the imaging demands of those devices are? Ken, can we start with you?
Certainly, Scott. Thank you. You know, we often think of imagery as a driver for commerce in the B2C world, but surprisingly, it's a key driver of commerce in the B2B world as well. And really, all you need to do is step into a service bay in a garage with younger technicians who are actively repairing and working and diagnosing those vehicles. And it's surprising to watch them as they are literally under the car that's on the lift, using their phone or tablet to take pictures of the products that they see need to be replaced. They're using that device to view the images so that they can discern which is the appropriate version of that product they need to obtain. And even to the point of emailing those images off to their customers to help them understand why the decision is being made to replace that component. And so if you think about the way various components fit on the vehicle, it's a natural ask by those consumers that we have more than single plane images. They need 360s or 3Ds so that they can properly identify that component regardless of the nomenclature used for it as they attempt to diagnose and repair those vehicles. And I see that every time I step into a modern facility today.
That's a great illustration of that. Thank you. Doug, do you have something to add to imaging requirements on mobile devices in your experience?
Yes, I do. Thank you. You know, in software development, we have a design tenet now. We just say mobile first. You really start with the approach of the customer's experience from mobile, and then make sure that it can kind of upsize to workstations and tablets. So that sort of thinking leads to getting in line with the other parts of the industry that have already moved in this direction. Our business-to-business trade in digital assets and the dissemination of that information is kind of lagged. And I would encourage our suppliers, hopefully inspire them to consider mobile as a priority in your approach to digital assets.
Mobile first. I like that tenet of software design. That's interesting. Bill, you told me you had a story about mobile devices and the imaging requirements of them.
Yeah, I do. And, you know, we often reach out to our customers to get feedback on their experience, not only on mobile, but on our desktop website as well. So just yesterday, we did a usability on 360 images. The customer was interacting with a fuel pump 360 image on our website. And then we also did the mobile as well. He really liked the interaction. He said he could visualize all the angles of the fuel pump. It was very clear on all the aspects of the pump, and he would feel very confident the pump would work on his car. However, he did say he wished it was on a bigger frame, which was interesting, especially on mobile. I think some of that had to do with our rendering opportunities. And of course, we're looking at that based on his feedback. But very positive on how he could zoom in, zoom out, you know, flip the fuel pump around, see all the connections and the configuration. So he was very satisfied with that display. And then we showed him a brake rotor with 3 static images with line drawings on the rotor to reflect the different dimensions. He said the dimensions about the size would definitely help to know whether or not it would fit his vehicle. But he said he disliked not having the interaction and the zoom capability, like on the fuel pump. He said he was not able to examine the product and said, I know it's a rotor, but not what kind it is. It could be anything. The zoom feature on the fuel pump let him see what is what. I know the size, but I don't get a good sense of what it really looks like. So long story short, he was extremely positive on the zoom and interaction and very disappointed when those features were not available.
Well, as with so many things, it sounds like the 360 is in addition to what you were doing previously, not instead of.
Correct.
I cut you off there. Did you have a further point, Bill?
No, I'm fine. Thanks, Scott.
Well, I heard it mentioned when we were talking the other day about a better user experience, and so can anybody comment on the experience? Ken, you said you were in the bays under the car, and the tech's got a phone and he's got one thumb, and that's the only free digit for navigating these images. How do 360s help the user experience?
Well, you know, Scott, I think anybody who's watched anyone else or even done anything with a mobile device can help you with that. When you're using one hand and you're using your thumb, the concept of rotating an image that's a 360 so that you can see all sides is easy, and it's something that's being done in other channels beyond automotive. But having to stop, you know, back up, click on the next image, then back up, click on the next image, or even trying to flip through images based on the carousel, it's just not as easy and not as quick for them to determine which product it is they need. And to Bill's point earlier, the concept of rotating that image so that they can make sure that what they see on the vehicle is exactly what they are trying to buy. It goes back to that old WYSIWYG story from years ago. What you see is what you get. And so for them on that mobile device, that's just key that they have that ability to thumb through it and rotate it.
Very, very helpful. Thank you so much. We've had one question submitted, and I want to turn to Pat and Ian to address the question of kits, because I believe you made the point that one of the first steps in the process is to evaluate your categories. And we've had one attendee ask, I have kits with anywhere from 16 to 20 components in them. What is the best practice relative to taking 360 images of kits?
Well, Scott, I think I'll feed that one for you. And, I did mention not all product lines are applicable for a 360 image. I do know that, for example, brake kits with their hardware present very well as a 360 image, and you get a lot of value from being able to rotate around a set of pads and the associated hardware, and be able to view all of the components. Whereas, a gasket set may or may not, something that's less than 3 millimeters high, maybe that top view gives you all the information you need. But it really boils down to the manufacturer needs to talk to the retailers that are actually selling the product online, and assess what the actual requirement is. And, I'll also say that I've seen some interesting things where you've got a part rotating within a 360 image, but then the other components are a static image embedded within that. And so in that case, you've got the best of both worlds. But ultimately, I would say talk to your trading partner and find out, work with them in terms of what you actually produce.
That's interesting. You described kind of a hybrid solution. Well, since we have three significant trading partners with us today, let's ask them first if they have any thoughts or requirements on imaging of kits and any other significant requirements that we should be made aware of. Doug, can we start with you on that?
Sure. Well, first, Auto Value and Bumper to Bumper would just like to embolden the suppliers to increase your minimum image size. I thought that was very well said, of all your products, and especially just provide more images. Secondly, you can solve a lot of these problems in one SWOT if you want to go with the 360. And so that might, I hope that will influence your approach. It's not always needed. Sometimes a search engine result page and that flashy, very high res product image is all you're going to need. So in the form of kits, maybe you've only got one or two parts that need that approach, and quite a few of the others would not require it.
Very good. I feel emboldened. Thank you, Doug. Bill, do you have any specific comment on kits or any other AutoZone requirements you can share?
Not really on kits. Really haven't thought that through as much. But today we just encourage our suppliers, to follow the Auto Care best practices for now, and also use the AutoZone content requirements document. We are currently updating our process to include specific content models for each category. I think we don't give our suppliers a lot of direction on exactly what we want. From multiple-sided images, of course, 360s and lifestyles and such. But I think that's better presented, to the supplier by each category. Because bigger and better images lead to bigger and better conversion rates, and the marketplaces know that. Also, just make sure your image is zoomable. The Ecom team tells me it requires 2,000 pixels at 300 ppi to achieve the zoom capability. We heard that loud and clear from our usability study with the customer, that was very important to them to be able to zoom in on the specific features, or for a part or product. It's also important to focus on the product, right? The thing you're selling should fill the image space and show just what the buyer will be getting. That's very important. And definitely no watermarks, no marketing copy, nothing to obscure or distract from the product itself. So we often see that as well. But just to add on, I just want to thank, all the suppliers. They've made some tremendous progress, over the past 10 years. Most of our products at AutoZone have at least one image. And, now, just like, in the presentation, it's time to further enhance that, that customer experience by providing 360 images, to give that customer, a virtual sense of having that product in their hands, like Ken said. Also important is giving customers a sense of how the product will represent itself in a customer's life. By making sure those lifestyle images are part of your content strategy. And also remember, a picture tells the buyer about the product before they ever read a word of marketing copy. So that's the first thing they see that draws their attention to.
That's a great message. Thank you, Bill. And I'm glad you got the comment in there about watermarks. Ken, do you have something further as far as requirements or for Napa GPC?
Well, I think, the question was what to do with kits originally, and I think Ian did a good job of communicating how best to handle that. There are kits where you can have the components all together, and you can rotate those, and the 360 does a good job. There are other kits where you need to do the hybrid, where certain components are 360s and others are single multi-plane. I think it really depends upon the components of the kit and working with the correct marketing people at your customer. I agree with Bill's comments. Watermarks are a thing of the past, simply not needed anymore. We made the decision to do the work to no longer have the Napa watermark represented on our e-commerce sites as well, and so there'll be changes coming to that. The consumer of today doesn't expect to see them. Most of the larger e-commerce sites like eBay and Amazon don't require them. In fact, most of them discourage it because it simply makes it more difficult for the consumer, whether they be B2C or B2B, to determine all the features and benefits of the product when they look at that image. So we do have some specific requirements. We communicated those a couple of years ago to our vendor community. They're posted on our site that our vendors can come to pull down all of the operations materials they need. We are looking for the highest resolution we can get our hands on, the most frames, as much in the 360 world, and even 3D and CAD drawings now, in order to facilitate the proper visual communication we need for our B2B customers.
Great, thank you very much. It really seems, as I've been saying for years, the bar just keeps getting higher and higher, and it is a relentless journey. But more so than many things, the investment in digital assets and multiple images and 360s seems to have a definite ROI, an impact on sales, as that eBay data certainly substantiates. And if the choice is not to capture a lot of images or not to invest in high quality images, that's not really a choice. Ken, you talked about the marketplaces a bit, and we all know and have heard stories of brands that don't invest in high quality data on eBay and Amazon, and they're not bashful about taking that brand down and until the condition is corrected. So whether it's B2B, B2C, online, or in the store, high quality images help sell the product. And the point I heard Bill make is they keep it sold. So in our closing minutes here, I don't want to overstay or overrun the hour time that we've allotted, but I'll throw a jump ball for any final comments any of you, Ken, Doug, or Bill, want to make about the business case, the benefits of an investment on the part of your suppliers in rich, high quality images. Any final thoughts?
Well, if I could jump in for just a minute here first, guys, I would say it's important that we all recognize that the B2B customer is also a B2C customer, if not for us in our industry, elsewhere. And whether we like it or not, the expectations set by their experience, whether on mobile or desktop, is always changing based upon the industry as a whole and who is producing better imagery today. And so if that consumer, wholesale and retail, ends up having a fabulous experience for tools or for appliances or for automobiles, they're going to expect and do expect that they have a similarly good experience when they're dealing with aftermarket auto parts.
That's a great point, and one that I like to make myself, Ken. A B2B customer is nothing more than a B2C who happens to be at work, and they bring their home shopping habits with them. And we're dealing with a generation, the millennials and beyond are now more than half of the workforce. They've never known a day without the internet, and they're bringing those habits and those behaviors to work with them. Doug, Bill, any final closing thoughts from you?
Yeah, we for several years now we've got a pretty good read on our in-store customers that a very high percentage of those customers go online before purchasing in an AutoZone store. And I think what really keeps us up at night is, how many customers do not purchase in a store due to lack of information, and most importantly, what that product looks like. Did we provide enough shot angles, enough interaction of the product for the customers, to come in a store and make a purchase decision? So I just think, in this day and time with all that activity on the mobile device and desktop devices and, customers going out and making sure we have the quality products they're looking for, and, we get that commitment online and get that commitment in the stores.
Great point. Great point. Thank you. Doug, I'll give you the last word.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, I think it's been said, we're all consumers. The multi-channel markets are here and just merging into one. And also I put a plug in to encourage the participation in the Auto Care group as we make these standards work for suppliers and receivers. There's good work there, and I appreciate your contributions thus far. Please take a look if you haven't.
Thanks very much, Doug, and good luck to you as chairman of the Tech Standards Committee. Well, I want to close by thanking our presenters, Ian McNabb and Pat Wheelmeyer of Visual SKUs. They and our panelists will make themselves available to answer questions that have not been addressed and that you submit through the links that you'll find here. You can write to a webinar at GCommerceInc.com, and shortly after our broadcast, you'll be able to go to GCommerceInc.com/webinar. And the recording will be available on demand. Share it with your colleagues, share it with your suppliers and trading partners, and remember to smile for the camera. Thanks very much for attending. We appreciate it, and we'll look forward to letting you know about our next webinar in the spring. Have a good day now.